Welcome to Flash News. Global food crisis could worsen if Ukrainian port of Odesa is not opened, UN official says. The world faces a perfect storm within a perfect storm when it comes to the food crisis, according to the head of the UN World Food Programme, David Beasley. Beasley explained that currently the world is facing a food pricing problem, but with issues over fertilizer and food production we could very well have a food availability problem. He added that if the port of Odesa is not opened, it will only compound the problem. There are 49 million people in 43 countries who are knocking on famine's door, and the world would face famine, destabilization, and mass migration if we don't get ahead of the problem, he said while speaking on a panel at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Beasley stressed that there are enough leaders in Davos this week to end world hunger. It's 3 p.m. in Kiev. Here's what you need to know. As the war in Ukraine rages on, up to 100 people are being killed every day in fighting in the east of the country, where Russia has centered its military efforts in recent weeks, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Meanwhile, Russia has likely suffered a similar death toll in the first 3 months of its invasion to that of the Soviet Union during its 9 years of war in Afghanistan, the UK Ministry of Defence said Monday. Here are today's latest developments. Russian soldier gets life sentence in first war crimes trial. A court in Kiev has found 21-year-old Russian soldier Vadim Shishimarin guilty of war crimes and sentenced him to life in prison. Shishimarin, who pleaded guilty to killing an unarmed civilian, is the first soldier to be sentenced for war crimes since Russia invaded Ukraine in February. Poland ends energy relationship with Russia. Poland's government has terminated a 30-year-old agreement with Russia over gas supplies and infrastructure, the country's climate minister, Anna Moskwa, announced Monday. The agreement included the supply of gas via the Yamal pipeline and the construction and maintenance of infrastructure related to the transit of gas through Poland. Up to 100 people killed daily in eastern Ukraine, President says. Zelensky said as many as 100 people are dying every day in the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Zelensky made the comment Sunday while speaking to press alongside Polish President Andrzej Duda. He was responding to a question about an online petition to allow men of conscription age, between the ages of 18 and 60, to leave Ukraine. Today, from 50 to 100 people could be killed here in the most complicated area, in the east of our country, Zelensky said. Russian death toll in Ukraine likely similar to Soviet war in Afghanistan, says UK. Russia has likely suffered a similar death toll in the first 3 months of its invasion of Ukraine to that of the Soviet Union during its 9 years of war in Afghanistan, the UK Ministry of Defence said Monday. A combination of poor low-level tactics, limited air cover, a lack of flexibility, and a command approach which is prepared to reinforce failure and repeated mistakes has led to this high casualty rate, which continues to rise in the Donbas offensive, the ministry said in an intelligence update. More than 6.5 million have fled Ukraine, says UN. At least 6.5 million people have left Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion on February 24, according to the latest United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees data. Ukrainian presidential advisor rules out ceasefire or concessions. Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to Zelensky, has ruled out a ceasefire with Russia and said Kiev would not accept any deal with Moscow that involved ceding territory. The war will not stop. It will just be put on pause for some time, he told Reuters in an interview on Saturday. Podolyak said making concessions would backfire on Ukraine because Russia would hit back harder after any break in fighting. Zelensky touts Ukraine rebuilding plan as a huge economic opportunity. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has called the rebuilding of his country after the war with Russia a huge economic opportunity in an address at the World Economic Forum in Davos. We will destroy our neighbor and rebuild entire cities and industries, in the largest rebuilding effort since the World War II, he pledged. Zelensky also outlined a plan which will offer companies to take patronage of rebuilding different areas in Ukraine. We are offering a historical opportunity, he said, and urged the global community to assist in the effort. Post-war rebuilding could be fast and efficient, the president said, adding it will attract the best. Separatist leader says a tribunal is planned for Ukrainian prisoners from Azovstal, Russian state news. Denis Pushilin, the leader of the self-declared Donetsk People's Republic, said Monday that a tribunal was being readied for Ukrainian soldiers who surrendered at the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, Russian state news agencies reported. According to Russian state news agency RIA Novosti, Pushilin said the Ukrainian prisoners are now on the territory of the DPR, a Russian-backed separatist territory in Ukraine's eastern Donbas region, and that documents were being prepared for a tribunal. Mariupol fell under complete Russian control last week with the surrender of Azovstal, the last bastion of Ukrainians defending the city. It is unclear how many Ukrainian soldiers would face a potential tribunal. The Russian military has claimed that over 2,000 Ukrainian service members surrendered at the vast steel works. In a separate news item, RIA reported Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rudenko as saying Russia was open to the possibility of discussing the exchange of Azovstal prisoners with Ukraine. More than 6.5 million people have fled Ukraine since Russian invasion, says UN Refugee Agency. At least 6.5 million people have fled Ukraine since the start of the Russian invasion in late February, according to the latest United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees data. In addition, more than 8 million people, nearly 1 in 5 of Ukraine's pre-war population, are internally displaced after having been forced to flee their homes. According to the latest report by the International Organization for Migration, a projected 8.3 million refugees are expected to flee Ukraine, the UNRWA said in late April. Kremlin concerned about fate of Russian soldier sentenced in Ukraine. The Kremlin is concerned about Russian soldier Vadim Shishamarin and will seek ways of providing assistance to him, Russian presidential spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said Monday. Shishamarin, 21, is the first Russian serviceman to be charged with war crimes in Ukraine. On Monday, Shishamarin was found guilty of shooting an unarmed civilian in Ukraine's Sumy region and sentenced by a Kiev court to life in prison. Of course, we are concerned about the fate of our citizen, Peskov told reporters on a regular conference call. We do not have many opportunities to protect his interests on the ground, as foreign institutions actually have no activity. But this does not mean that we will not consider the possibility of making attempts through other channels, Peskov added without clarifying which channels he was speaking about. Zelensky calls for maximum sanctions against Russia in Davos address. The global community must impose maximum sanctions against Russia, including a full oil embargo, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged in a video address to the World Economic Forum in Davos, which is now underway. The international community must be ready to use sanctions preventively, not to just respond to threats in the future, he told world and business leaders in attendance. If these sanctions had been in place in the first place, Russia would not have been able to invade Ukraine, he claimed, calling for full bans on Russian banks and a complete halt in trade. The aggressor would know the immediate consequences of its actions, he said. We must set a precedent for sanctions, he said, questioning whether a large collection of responses from institutions such as the United Nations and World Trade Organization is enough to respond to the threats of today. The latest sanctions were announced earlier this month, when leaders of the G7 met virtually with Zelensky. The measures included new export controls against the Russian industrial sector and roughly 2,600 visa restrictions on Russian and Belarusian officials, as well as the first sanctions against executives of Gazprom Bank, the institution through which most of Europe buys Russian gas. Russian soldier sentenced to life in prison in first war crimes trial of Ukraine war. A court in Kiev has found 21-year-old Russian soldier Vadim Shishimirin guilty of war crimes and sentenced him to life in prison. The court found Vadim Shishimirin guilty of committing a criminal offense under Part 2 of Article 438 of the Criminal Code of Ukraine, and sentenced him to life imprisonment, it court said. Adding that, the sentence may be appealed within 30 days from the date of its promulgation. Shishimirin is the first Russian soldier to be sentenced for war crimes since Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24. You are not alone, UK leader Boris Johnson tells the children of Ukraine. In a letter addressed to the children of Ukraine, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson expressed sympathy for what they have gone through under Russia's invasion. In any other year, children like you would be spilling out of your homes and schools to play with your friends, to chase a football, to simply enjoy what is supposed to be a uniquely carefree time in your lives. Of course, this is not any other year, Johnson wrote in the letter, which was posted on his Twitter in both English and Ukrainian. You should be immensely proud. Proud of your country, your parents, your families, and your soldiers, and most of all proud of yourselves, Johnson wrote, praising them as role models for children and adults everywhere. He went on to say, you are not alone. You may be separated from your friends at home, but you have millions of others all over the world. In the letter, Johnson referenced his visit to Kiev last month, during which he met with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He ended it saying he believes Ukraine will win the war and that he hopes one day soon they will be able to return to their homes, schools, and families. Johnson has been under intense political pressure in recent months, becoming the first UK premier in history found to have broken the law in office as part of the Partygate scandal. His government is also grappling with a cost of living crisis. Poland ends energy relationship with Russia, minister says. Poland's government has terminated a 30-year-old agreement with Russia over gas supplies and infrastructure, the country's climate minister, Anna Moskwa announced Monday. Poland denounces the 1993 intergovernmental gas agreement on the Yamal, Moskwa tweeted. Russia's aggression against Ukraine confirmed the correctness of the Polish government's determination in the direction of complete independence from Russian gas. We have always known that Gazprom is not a trustworthy partner, she added. The agreement included the supply of gas via the Yamal pipeline and the construction and maintenance of infrastructure related to the transit of gas through Poland. Some background: as of Sunday, Lithuania has completely cut imports of Russian energy supplies including oil, electricity, and natural gas. This came a day after Russia stopped its natural gas exports to Finland. Poland and Bulgaria were cut off in late April because they did not make payments in the Russian currency, a move EU leaders described at the time as blackmail by Moscow. Up to 100 people killed each day fighting in eastern Ukraine, Zelensky says. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says up to 100 people are being killed each day in fighting in eastern Ukraine, where Russia has centered its military efforts in recent weeks. Zelensky made the comment Sunday while speaking to press alongside Polish President Andrzej Duda. He was responding to a question about an online petition to allow men of conscription age, between the ages of 18 and 60, to leave Ukraine. The petition, posted on the Ukrainian president's official website, had gained more than 26,000 signatures as of Monday morning. I don't quite understand whom this petition addresses. Does this petition address me? Or, maybe this petition should address the parents of those warriors, who lost these people, because they defended Ukraine at the cost of their lives. Zelensky said. He added, today, from 50 to 100 people could be killed here in the most complicated area, in the east of our country. They are defending our country and our independence, about which so many in the world are talking about, so many are talking, but we feel it personally very, very much, the president said. Zelensky said the petition would be considered according to the law, at the right time, and irrespective of whether he personally likes it or not. Ukrainian presidential advisor rules out ceasefire or concessions to Russia. Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak has ruled out a ceasefire with Russia and said Kiev would not accept any deal with Moscow that involved ceding territory. The war will not stop. It will just be put on pause for some time, he told Reuters in an interview in the presidential office on Saturday. Podolyak said making concessions would backfire on Ukraine because Russia would hit back harder after any break in fighting. After a while, with renewed intensity, the Russians will build up their weapons, manpower, and work on their mistakes, modernize a little, fire many generals. And they'll start a new offensive. Even more bloody and large-scale, Podolyak said. Russia can't be left halfway because they will up revanchist mood and be even more cruel. Podolyak also dismissed calls for an urgent ceasefire that would involve Russian forces remaining in territory they have occupied in Ukraine's south and east, saying the forces must leave the country and after that the resumption of the peace process will be possible. Head of the Ukrainian president's office Andriy Yermak echoed Podolyak's words, tweeting Sunday that the war must end with the complete restoration of Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. Russian death toll in Ukraine likely similar to Soviet war in Afghanistan, says UK Defense Ministry. Russia has likely suffered a similar death toll in the first 3 months of its invasion of Ukraine to that of the Soviet Union during its 9 years of war in Afghanistan. The UK Ministry of Defense said Monday. A combination of poor low-level tactics, limited air cover, a lack of flexibility, and a command approach which is prepared to reinforce failure and repeated mistakes has led to this high casualty rate, which continues to rise in the Donbas offensive, the ministry said in an intelligence update. Tuesday marks 3 months since Russia launched its assault on Ukraine on February 24. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan ran from December 1979 to February 1989. Some context. The official Soviet death toll during the Afghan war was around 15,000 soldiers. In March, senior NATO officials estimated that as many as 15,000 Russian soldiers may have been killed in Ukraine in just 1 month alone. Ukrainians describe brutal filtration process to escape Russian-held territory. What would happen if we cut off your ear? The soldiers asked Oleksandr Vidovikenko. Then they hit him in the head. The punches kept coming whenever his interrogators, a mixture of Russian soldiers and pro-Russian separatists, didn't like his answers, he later told his family. The men asked about his politics, his future plans, his views on the war. They checked his documents, took his fingerprints and stripped him to check if he had any nationalist tattoos or marks caused by wearing or carrying military equipment. They were trying to beat something out of him, his daughter Maria Vidovikenko told CNN in an interview. Maria said her father received so many blows to his head during the interrogation last month that several medical examinations have now confirmed his sight has been permanently damaged. Yet Oleksandr was one of the lucky ones. He made it through filtration. When Russian troops first started taking over villages and towns in eastern Ukraine in early March, following their invasion of the country, evidence began to emerge of civilians being forced to undergo humiliating identity checks and often violent questioning before being allowed to leave their homes and travel to areas still under Ukrainian control. 3 months into the war, the dehumanizing process known as filtration has become part of the reality of life under Russian occupation. CNN spoke to a number of Ukrainians who have gone through the filtration process over the last 2 months. Many are too scared to speak publicly, fearing for the safety of relatives and friends who are still trying to escape Russian-held areas. All of the people CNN spoke to have described facing threats and humiliation during the process. Many have witnessed or know of people who have been picked up by Russian troops or separatist soldiers and subsequently disappeared without a trace. Ukrainians must endure a brutal filtration process to escape Russian-held territory. Here's what that means. Kiev, Ukraine, what would happen if we cut off your ear? The soldiers asked Oleksandr Vdovikenko. Then they hit him in the head. The punches kept coming whenever his interrogators, a mixture of Russian soldiers and pro-Russian separatists, didn't like his answers, he later told his family. The men asked about his politics, his future plans, his views on the war. They checked his documents, took his fingerprints and stripped him to check if he had any nationalist tattoos or marks caused by wearing or carrying military equipment. They were trying to beat something out of him, his daughter Maria Vdovikenko told CNN in an interview. Maria said her father received so many blows to his head during the interrogation last month that several medical examinations have now confirmed his sight has been permanently damaged. Yet Oleksandr was one of the lucky ones. He made it through filtration. When Russian troops first started taking over villages and towns in eastern Ukraine in early March, following their invasion of the country, evidence began to emerge of civilians being forced to undergo humiliating identity checks and often violent questioning before being allowed to leave their homes and travel to areas still under Ukrainian control. 3 months into the war, the dehumanizing process known as filtration has become part of the reality of life under Russian occupation. CNN spoke to a number of Ukrainians who have gone through the filtration process over the last 2 months. Many are too scared to speak publicly, fearing for the safety of relatives and friends who are still trying to escape Russian-held areas. All of the people CNN spoke to have described facing threats and humiliation during the process. Many have witnessed or know of people who have been picked up by Russian troops or separatist soldiers and subsequently disappeared without a trace. For most of the people CNN spoke to, the filtration process included document checks, interrogation, fingerprinting, and a search. Many were separated from their families. Men were routinely stripped and examined. Lyudmila Denisova, the Ukrainian parliament's human rights ombudsman, said earlier this month that Russian forces had created an extensive network of places where Ukrainians are being subjected to filtering. She said such places have been established in every occupied Ukrainian city, and that more than 37,000 citizens have already gone through the procedure. Nikolai Ryabchenko told CNN he fled Mariupol in mid-March when the city was closed and people were not allowed to move around. We found a way to avoid checkpoints and came to Nikolsk and we stayed there for a couple of weeks, he said. I asked everyone I met how to get out and the filtration is obligatory. Information signs that have been posted in Mariupol after Russian troops took over the city leave no room for doubt. Evacuation can be carried out if there is a document confirming the passage of the filtration procedure. CNN has seen a photo of one such sign taken by a person who escaped the city. Everyone has to go through filtration, both men and women, in order to move around the city freely, 20-year-old Karina, another Mariupol resident, who is only being identified by her first name due to security concerns, told CNN. She has managed to escape Mariupol, but her father, who has not yet passed the filtration process and has no idea why, is still there. A month after being picked up by Russian soldiers on a street in Mariupol, he is still being held in what the self-declared separatist Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine calls a reception center at a school in Bezymen, around 20 miles east of Mariupol, he told his daughter. The separatist-held Bezymen has been used by Russian troops as a screening facility for refugees from Mariupol and surrounding areas. In 3 separate statements published last week, the DPR Territorial Defense said almost 1,000 evacuees from Mariupol have been brought to the Bezymen Center in 3 days. It said that as of May 17, more than 33,000 people have gone through the facility. Earlier this month, the Russian Ministry of Defense released a video showing evacuees from Mariupol arrive in a filtration camp outside the city in buses. The ministry published the videos without saying where the refugees were taken, or when the evacuations took place. CNN has been able to geolocate the footage, and it shows that they were taken to Bazimen. Separately, satellite images from Maxar Technologies have showed a tent encampment being erected in the separatist-held Bazimen as early as in March. Karina said she had been able to speak to her father, who told her that conditions there were appalling. Some sleep on the floor, some are luckier on chairs, and some are even luckier and have mattresses in the gym, she said. There's no opportunity to wash and no normal restroom. All of them were ill because it was too cold to sleep on the floor. Karina said her father had told her the guards in the center have refused to provide any medicine to the people being held there. They are being fed watery soup and other prison-like food cooked in a field kitchen, he said. Ombudsman Denisova said the Bazimen center where Karina's father is being held is just one of several such facilities set up in the Donetsk region. She said Russian troops have established similar filtration camps in Koshayevsk, Mykolsky, Mangush, Bezimeny, and Yalta. She accused Russia of using the centers to detain and wipe out any officials, members of the military or the volunteer territorial defense forces, activists, or anyone they consider a threat. Maria Vdovikenko told CNN it looked like the soldiers were trying to find anything they could say was incriminating. They were looking for Ukrainian-speaking people, for Ukrainian symbols, tattoos, she said, adding that the soldiers checked her phone, but didn't find anything compromising. We have deleted everything because people in the line told us they can look at everything, contacts, for example, they could call some of your contacts, and pictures. For every Ukrainian. It is normal to have pictures in Vyshyvanka or with a flag, or near Shevchenko monument. Maria said. I'm a Bandura player, it wasn't good idea to show that. So I deleted that, took a couple of new pictures, and deleted my social network profiles, she added. Michael Carpenter, the U.S. ambassador to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, said last month there was credible reporting that Russia's forces are rounding up the local civilian populations in these areas, detaining them in these camps, and brutally interrogating them for any supposed links to the legitimate Ukrainian government or to independent media outlets. Speaking last week, Carpenter added, numerous eyewitness accounts indicate that filtering out entails beating and torturing individuals to determine whether they owe even the slightest allegiance to the Ukrainian state. Mariupol City Council has accused Russian forces of using the filtration centers to identify witnesses to any atrocities committed by Russian troops during the battle for the control of the city. CNN could not verify that claim. The Kremlin has denied using filtration camps to cover up wrongdoing and targeting civilians in Mariupol. The self-declared DPR has denied accusations by Ukrainian authorities of unlawful detentions, filtration and maltreatment of Ukrainian citizens, and said that those arriving at what it calls reception centers are properly fed and provided medical attention. Karina said that, according to her father, most of the men in the center have no idea why they are being held. They were told the filtration would take 1 to 2 days maximum and that these needed to check if they took part in hostilities, Karina told CNN. They have been trapped there since April 12 and have no idea when they will be released. That uncertainty makes the process terrifying for Ukrainians trying to flee to safety. Most have no idea what to expect. Ukrainian social media pages for people stuck in Russian-controlled regions, or their families searching for them, are full of questions about filtration. Yana, who left Bryansk in southern Ukraine to stay with relatives in Rostov in Russia, the only place she said she was able to get to, said the process appeared to be completely random. She asked CNN not to publish her last name, fearing retribution. Close friends told me that they stood in line for filtration for 6 days, spent the nights in cars, and yet some passed quickly. I don't know why, apparently it depends on which shift you will get, she said. Before the war, Eugen Tuzov was a martial arts instructor in Mariupol. Now he spends most of his time trying to organize transport for people stuck in the Russian-occupied city and the surrounding areas who want to flee to places under Ukrainian control. He, too, told CNN the filtration process at checkpoints on the roads leading out of Mariupol, he said there were at least 27 of them, appeared to be random. Everything depends on shift. Someone is lucky, someone comes to a SHTTY shift, he said. The DPR people were the worst, they are disheveled, slovens, sometimes they are drunk already in the morning, behaving terribly. You see men 50, 60 years old and you can see it from his face that he drinks constantly, Ryabchenko told CNN. Petro Andriushchenko, an advisor to the Mariupol mayor, said in a statement on Monday that Russian troops have set up 5 filtration points across the city. Mariupol residents need to pass this procedure in order to receive a certificate allowing them to move around the city, he said, adding, "If this isn't a ghetto, I don't know what is." Yana said her parents had to undergo filtration at a hospital in Donetsk, where they were taken after being wounded in a strike. Having already spent more than 2 weeks hiding in a shelter in Mariupol with no medical help. People came from some service, took their fingerprints, told them this is filtration since they could not walk, but it had to be done, such rules are in the DPR, she said. Yana said when she and her husband drove out of the area, they had to pass almost 20 checkpoints. And at almost every checkpoint, they undressed my husband, looked for tattoos and weapons marks and asked whether he had served in the army, she said. Tuzov said the volunteers in his transport service have similar experiences. He said some were subjected to lie detector tests and that, as far as he knows, at least 30 of them were detained during the process. They were taken at checkpoints. They check phones, social networks, if you wrote something about them. They take you away, he said. Tuzov said he doesn't know the fate of those who have been detained. CNN has previously reported that some of those picked up in the process end up being sent to Russia. Maria Vidovikenko said she and her family, her parents and younger sister, waited in Nova Yalta for about 20 days before they were allowed to go through the filtration process. We were told we wouldn't be able to get out without that, she told CNN. They will just check documents and phones, and we will leave. But it wasn't as easy as they promised. She said the family queued for 2 days and 2 nights without being allowed to leave their car. Finally, Maria and her father were taken to a small wooden structure about 200 meters away. Her younger sister and her mother, who wasn't able to walk, were told to stay in the vehicle. While waiting to enter the makeshift building, Maria said she felt threatened. Were talking among themselves. It was scary to listen to what can happen to people who didn't pass the filtration. I will remember it forever. She said she overheard one of the soldiers guarding the site saying, "I killed 10, and didn't count further." The reports coming from these facilities have shocked the international community, and the practice was cited as one of the reasons for Russia to be suspended from the UN's Human Rights Council in April. Despite the outrage, evidence from the ground, testimonies from those who escape and statements by the separatist authorities show Russia has only increased its use of filtration since then. It's not the first time either. During the war in Chechnya, Russian forces used filtration camps to separate civilians from rebel fighters. Legendary Russian investigative reporter Anna Politkovskaya gathered testimony from Chechen civilians detained these centers, revealing brutal interrogation methods, torture and human rights violations. She was murdered in her Moscow apartment building in 2006. At least one person was killed on Sunday after Russia fired naval-based cruise missiles at the Zhytomyr region, west of Kiev, according to the Ukrainian military. Here are the latest developments. Ukraine-Poland customs deal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced a historic joint customs control with Poland that he described as the beginning of our integration into the common customs space of the European Union. Zelensky said it would significantly speed up border procedures and remove most of the corruption risks. It comes after France's European Affairs Minister said Ukraine's bid to join the EU would take at least 15 or 20 years to complete. Staggering milestone: more than 100 million people have been forced to flee conflict, violence, and persecution worldwide, a record figure fueled by the situation in Ukraine, the UN Refugee Agency said Monday. UNRWA described the stark figure as sobering and alarming in equal measure, and said it should serve as a wake-up call. The war in Ukraine has displaced 8 million within the country, and more than 6 million refugee movements from Ukraine have been registered, it said. British PM blasts blockade. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Sunday he would redouble efforts to provide vital food and humanitarian aid to Ukraine. During a phone call with Zelensky, Johnson spoke about the despicable blockade of the key port city of Odesa and said the UK would work to ensure that it is able to export to the rest of the world. According to a statement, cruise missile attack. At least one person was killed Sunday in a Russian missile attack on Malin, in the Zhytomyr region, west of Kiev, according to the Ukrainian military. Ukraine's Air Command Center said Russian forces fired naval-based cruise missiles from the southeastern direction at infrastructure facilities in Zhytomyr. The center added that its air defense units had destroyed 4 Russian cruise missiles. 3 were destroyed by aircraft, 1 by an anti-aircraft missile. Russia House rebranded, a venue normally used by Russia to promote itself at the World Economic Forum in Davos, has been rebranded as the Russian War Crimes House. A Ukrainian businessman, working with the WEF, has turned the Russia House venue into an exhibition depicting the devastation and destruction of the war in Ukraine. New Zealand to offer more support in training Ukrainian forces, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern said on Monday that her country would deploy an extra 30 Defence Force personnel to the United Kingdom to support the training of Ukrainian armed forces. The soldiers will be stationed in the United Kingdom until the end of July, Ardern said. They will train Ukrainian soldiers on how to use the L-119 light gun, she added. The troops, training ammunition, and surplus equipment including aiming systems will be moved in an airlift coordinated by the UK. This follows a previous deployment of 66 New Zealand Defence Force personnel in April along with a Royal New Zealand Air Force C-130 Hercules.